New week, new H2DG, and you'll soon see that I got time today. Because I definitely want to get into quite the trio of hot topics from the recent days, such as Nelly saying that his era of rap slash hip hop was the toughest ever. This new NBA trend going around on TikTok and social media among the younger generation called "We Done with the Insert Decade Here." So we done with the 80s, we done with the 90s, kind of in the effort to disrespect the players of the past. So I don't like that. And I got time to talk about that today. And then I want to also talk about the way that I feel the OKC Thunder, Minnesota Timberwolves, and Denver Nuggets all look Western Conference Finals ready. So I want to analyze those teams and kind of give you my thoughts on what I'm seeing from them so far with the playoffs around the corner. And then, as always, we got to end with this week's Dog of the Week, which will feature an absolute superstar in the game today. So definitely some hot topics in the lineup here, as it's about that time to kick back and get ready for it all right now on H2DG. Welcome to Hip to the Games, the podcast for you, the basketball junkie and the hip hop head. I'm your host, Desmond, and I too have had hoop dreams and enjoy the beautiful genre of hip hop and its history. Together, we will enjoy some of the greatest albums, songs, artists, players, moments, teams, and so much more, while even mixing the two on occasion, all in my hope that you remember why you love both or either of these to begin with. You'll soon understand that Hip to the Games is more than just a podcast. It's a lifestyle. And if you were looking for a platform that combines both basketball and hip hop, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the newest episode of Hip to the Games. If you are a loyal listener, I want to say welcome back and thank you for your continued support as we're getting closer and closer, step by step, to the 100 episode milestone. There's still so much I want to do, so much I can do, and so much I'm going to find out that I can do. And even in now putting in more work to aid in the video aspect now, all the support that you show week in, week out truly means everything. So whether you are supporting through traditional audio or are watching right now on YouTube, I appreciate you. Either way, I appreciate you nonetheless. And of course, if this is your first time listening to Hip to the Games, welcome. If the intro wasn't enough for you, I would strongly encourage you to listen to the very first two episodes of the podcast, or even episode 30, in which I celebrated the first birthday of Hip to the Games, 1 year as a podcaster at that time. I think those episodes can kind of give you a nice idea of what this podcast is about, a little bit of what I'm about and how I incorporate, my values and everything, whether it comes to faith, the podcast, hip hop, basketball, whatever it may be. Those are just some nice episodes that could give you a nice uh, overview of what this podcast is really all about and what my goals for it are and everything. And just a little bit of how I like to do things. I know 80 plus episodes now is a lot to catch up on for if you're a new listener here. So listen to those past episodes. If you want to kind of catch up, if you will. But of course, there's plenty of stuff in between, so much stuff in between that's important to Hip to the Games and what this podcast is all about. So I definitely encourage you to go back in time a little bit and listen to some previous episodes as well. But moving forward, though, before we really get into today's episode, you already know I got to get my shout outs out the way. All right. The first one always goes to the creative director, Jesus Christ, for another H2DG episode, as it's always a privilege to pursue the dream he's put in me through this podcast. And the again, he's called the creative director for a reason. So he's guiding me every step of the way. Every idea you see executed on this platform has come from him. So I always want to give him the glory before we start. And then the second one goes to my 19 Media Group family for the platform and support, as it's always a privilege to represent the home team. All right, be sure to follow 19M Group on Twitter, 19 Media Group on Instagram and YouTube to follow everything going on with the network. All right, we have a variety of shows around sports, music, culture, hosted by some awesome independent podcasters. And I'm sure you can find another teammate of mine to support, whether it's likes, comments, reposts, listens, any kind of support is appreciated. And, you might see me in person, you might see me on the TL and wonder, Des, how can I support you? And the good thing about support is that it's versatile. Right. So yes, all of those ways mean a lot, but to give a more earnest answer, when you see anything posted on socials, like it, comment, share it, repost it. If you're on an audio platform, leave a rating. Let these folks know why they should also listen to Hip to the Games. Podcasts have increased, especially since the pandemic. They've increased in great number. And again, I have a radio background, so like I really know how this business kind of goes. People love banter, people love TV. That's why video podcasts specifically are on such a rise. Like I always say, the TikTokification of social media has made them like a hot commodity now. And when you couple that with shows with multiple hosts, right? If you have shows with one, two, even three hosts, those shows are always going to get love, right? In radio, you're encouraged to have multiple hosts for multiple opinions, for multiple conversation. And, sometimes people don't just want conversation, they want a little banter in there as well. That's why all these shows get so popular and whatnot. So imagine how tougher it can be for somebody who's independent, right? For somebody, again, not just me, but a lot like my 19 teammates and even other podcasters out in the world. It can be harder for someone like me who has a solo show, doesn't have this crazy following. You may not get the viral moments all the time, and the YouTube link. And you got the whole, network pushing your stuff. They're creating your show notes and pushing your content and editing your content. And all you got to do is hit posting and watch it all, all the fruit flow in, you know, it's you just can't see the viral moments and the YouTube link. Like you actually got to listen to the show. As somebody who edits everything, uploads everything, creates all the social media content, executes ideas, brainstorms new ones, books the guest. I'm the one sliding in the guest DMs most of the time, like outlining my show from start to finish. Like, don't get it confused. Wholeheartedly, 90% of what you see here is done by me and Jesus, right? That's why, again, I always got to give him his shout out because, especially starting the video episodes recently, as humbly as I can say this, I worked my butt off to make this show auditory and now visually different than the next. So that's why I'm so big on support because people think you turn on the mic and go viral. Like, nah, dog. Like it's a journey. It's a journey. It's a journey that I love and a journey that gets real sometimes. So as I said, I got plenty of ways to support. If you're ever wondering how you can support, like ODB said, it's all in your face like a can of mace. Whether you want to buy merch, I would appreciate that. If you listen, I appreciate that. You leave a comment, you leave a like, you repost something, like I appreciate it all. Those are all kinds of ways you can support. And it's up to you to decide if and how you want to support. All those ways are there. It's just up to you how you want to do it. Simple as that. So forgive me for such a long-winded intro right now, but I just got to keep it real with you sometimes. But enough of all that. We're gonna get right into the episode today. All right, all our pregame stuff out the way. We got to tip today's episode off with the format that pays homage to the classic hip hop song structure. All right, I got three verses today, which represents three topics for the show. The first verse always has to set the tone. The middle one always brings the climax or rising action. And your last verse has to be the haymaker, the best of all. So since we always got to start with a bang, I figured I'd turn up the heat out the gate by discussing how Nelly recently shared how he felt like his era of rap slash hip hop, which he classified as 1999 to 2008, 2010 ish, was the toughest ever. And that's the key word there, the toughest ever. All right. So first things first, Nelly said this on LeBron James' show, The Shop. Always gonna have great conversations and sound bites from the wide variety of guests they have on that show. I mean, come on, the premises of the show is to reflect the variety of conversation that goes on in the barbershop, right? So there are debates, agreements, real talk, banter, venting, so we can't act like what he said was something wild or out of pocket, especially because it's Nelly. We can't act like he wasn't one of the hottest artists out once upon a time. So he has every right to say what he's saying. Now, before I really get into my general thoughts, I think the idea that two things can be true certainly applies here. Nelly has every right to believe that his era The era that he was active in and found success in was the toughest. This is no different than NBA legends saying that their era was the best, right? You got guys like Kareem and Dr. J and Oscar Robertson, who to this day praise the game they came up in and the players they went up against. Yes, rules were different. Yes, athletes weren't as evolved. So many factors can go into it, but they do have the right to make that claim and have firsthand experience to back it up, right? Simple and plain. And it's also true that Nelly has to remember that, for example, 1988 was tough. Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions, Big Daddy Kane, Long Live the Kane, The Great Adventures of Slick Rick, Follow the Leader, Eric B. and Rakim, EPMD, Strictly Business, NWA, Straight Outta Compton, MC Light, Light as a Rock, He's the DJ, I'm the Rapper, Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, Run DMC, Too Short, Biz Markie, all stars. All stars. 1996 was incredibly tough as well. Pac drops All Eyes on Me, Lil Kim Hardcore, Outkast ATLiens, Fugees The Score, Jay-Z Reasonable Doubt, De La Soul, Stakes is High, Redman, Muddy Waters, UGK Riding Dirty, all stars. So it's kind of funny how Nelly pretty much threw out a whole range of a decade, right? Yet there were literally single years in hip hop that had artists that were in such an amazing place to where it was crazy competitive, right? Like, so not only I think that's something Nelly has to keep in mind, that he has every right to feel that way, but come on, 1988 was tough. All right, 1996 was incredibly tough. To say it's the toughest ever is kind of, I don't know. I don't know. But again, I think Nelly does have a point though, in all seriousness. Like, that post Y2K era of hip hop was insane because the internet is gradually starting to pop off, right? Social media starts to kind of enter its tadpole stage. And eventually, right, this is the decade that starts to mature as the years go by. And then let's be real too. In my opinion, that kind of era was about being the hottest artist. It was post Jiggy era. So it kept some of the flash and flavor. It wasn't necessarily about the substance that the 90s carried. It was a little bit more of the flash. Not to say that there wasn't substance. Okay, don't twist what I'm saying, but just the flash and the flavor that came in this era was big. You had guys that catered to that, right? I mean, for an example, like, just listen to Reasonable Doubt and then listen to The Blueprint, right? Like, obviously, yes, is it still Jay telling his stories and his honesty and everything like that? Absolutely. But the style of it was a little bit different. He has some flash in there. He has some flavor in there. Same thing with Blueprint too, like compared to Reasonable Doubt, which was more mafioso, rugged, you know what I'm saying? I think that's what the this kind of era that Nelly was in was kind of heading towards and really sitting in, I should say. And not to mention, a vast increase in blingage as well. Like, this was the bling era, right? As some people call it, like diamonds on the ear, diamonds on the wrist, diamonds on the neck, diamonds in the car, diamonds on the bed. Like, this era was flashy. It was flashy, so you had to be hot to maintain the glitz and the glamour. But back to the point at hand, I think of the artists Nelly named as well. He goes on record and names DMX, Jay-Z, Eminem, Lil Wayne, 50 Cent, and Luda. And every single one of these guys, Nelly included, had their moment at some point. DMX kicked it off in 1998. He drops two #1 albums just months apart from each other, which pretty much made him top dog all of 1999. And again, before social media was really popping, right? So we can actually kind of tangibly see his impact in that famous Woodstock performance in front of the entire population, right? He performed in front of the world on that show. And so just imagine how much greater that would have been if streaming was as big as it was today, right? In 2000, Eminem takes the top spot with Marshall Mathers LP. And although, keep in mind, Jay-Z has The Dynasty this year. Nelly drops Country Grammar that year. Outkast, Stankonia, Bow Wow, Beware of Dog, Mystical, Let's Get Ready, Luda, Back for the First Time, and Ja Rule, right? Rule 336. I know y'all always got stuff to say about Ja Rule, but Ja Rule got hits, okay? Ja Rule got hits. So my point is, all of those drop in the year 2000. So to Nelly's point, look at his competition. It's tough to maintain or even get a #1 look or a top spot or the Grammy or the BET award when your competition is that. So I think they were all hot, but Eminem's was just hotter, right? Then think about that too. All these artists are really entering their primes, if not already kind of sitting in there. There a lot of these guys are still young, entering their primes, or at least young in hip hop years, right? So like then you go into 2001, DMX, Ja Rule, Jay. 2002, Nelly gets a lot of love with Nellyville, but he does rival Nas, Luda, and Jay. But then again, Eminem has another dominant year because he drops the Eminem Show and the 8 Mile soundtrack. So right, kind of like DMX did in '98. This dude has two albums that he can go off of and that are just going crazy right now. So that kind of puts him in a higher point than everybody else, right? Then we move on to 2003. We know that was 50's year, right? 50 was on top of everybody in 2003. But even then, right, Jay-Z thinks he gonna retire. He decides to drop the Black Album. So now you got two heavyweights there, right? So where is there room for a Nelly or even Eminem, right? He just had a dominant year, but now look at these two albums. Where's there room for Luda, right? Luda talks about this as well, how he was really fighting to get a Grammy and he just wasn't getting looked at. He, without saying it, he's kind of saying the same thing Nelly's saying here, how tough it was in his era to get to the top because there were so many heavyweights at this time. And then you move forward, 2004, here comes this dude named Kanye West dropping his album, right? 2005, this dude named The Game drops the documentary, right? Then you got Lil Jon, you got T.I., right? This guy from the South. And then Luda and Eminem are still kind of towards that top spot. So again, Nelly's not getting his love. He's getting love for sure, but it's not to the range that these artists are getting. If we're talking maybe accolades and whatnot. Again, 2006, 2007, this is when Kanye is starting to take over. 2008, we get the Carter 3, right? So now Lil Wayne has literally kicked down the door and said, I'm the best rapper alive right now, So I think Nelly makes a very valid point by essentially saying that not only did he have to worry about the giants who came in the game or who were already established in the game, but he had to then worry about the up and comers like Kanye, T.I., and Wayne who were ready to take somebody's spot. So, what do you do when you put your heart into your debut album only to see DMX perform in front of the entire world, right? Imagine reaching the #1 spot on Billboard only for arguably the best rapper in Jay-Z to get with all the hottest producers, Just Blaze, Timbaland, Pharrell, Kanye, Dr. Dre, Scott Storch, No ID, for an album that drops later that year. You know what I'm saying? And which, again, that momentum is going to go into the next year on fire. So, how do you even think about your next album when another artist drops their debut in dominant fashion, resonating with the streets, the girls, and the radio? He's checking all the boxes, and this whole time you still got to worry about your peers who are still making and dropping projects themselves. So, listen, I don't know about the toughest ever, but Nelly definitely has a point when he mentions how tough his era was. Like I said, if we do think about the 80s, though, their era was just as tough, if not tougher. That's why I would challenge Nelly and say, like, hey, you make a good point, but your era got to see the world love hip hop. The previous generations, most notably the 80s, had to fight to even keep hip hop afloat. And that was a battle within itself, right? Forget the aspect of competition between MCs. You're essentially battling the world, right? Everybody thinks this thing is a fad. Everybody thinks this thing is a trend that's going to eventually die off. So you got to show how dope you are. Again, I just in the other episode I did before my episode, You'll Never Know, like Fresh Prince and DJ Jazzy Jeff, they had to boycott the Grammys because it's like they don't take us serious enough for us to even present our award on TV. Like it's all behind the scenes and stuff, right? The 80s, those guys had to fight against that. And then I think, I still believe that, it was very tough for the 80s to kind of to get accepted, to let hip hop be accepted as an art form. And that was a tough era. That's a tough era to be in when, we love showing love to the pioneers, but we often forget what they had to go through to get us to where we are today. So I think, the 80s deserve some warranted love for that. And I think, I still believe the 90s checked most of the boxes in terms of originality, versatility, lyricism, those kinds of qualities. I would say like the 80s kicked down the doors and gave us the blueprint. The 90s turned the house into a home, if you will. And then the 2000s made it more fun and appealing to a wider variety of audiences, allowing others to find a place in the proverbial home here. So, with each era having its own collection of great competition along the way. So I won't say Nelly is tripping, but I can't say he's 100% right either. However, he makes a very valid point, and I can definitely see where he's coming from. What do you think, though? Does Nelly have a point, or is he tripping a little bit? Want to elaborate on a point I may have missed during this conversation? Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube, or comment on the Instagram post that coincides with the episode, or tweet the show at Hip to the Games to share your thoughts with me, as I'd love to hear what you think and love to read your thoughts on the issues or the conversation as well. But in the meantime, we're going to flip to the basketball side of things for verse 2 and try to school the youngins over yet another foolish trend that just makes my butt itch, and a trend that I think will only continue to worsen the basketball discourse moving forward. I mean, come on now. You know me. I told you I got time today. I got to represent and defend the game I love. All right. So if you also love basketball and hip hop and you love Hip to the Games, here's how you can show some love to the podcast. As a fan of Hip to the Games, not only should you show your love for the podcast, but you gotta express your love for basketball and hip hop. With a wide variety of clothing and accessories, there is always a way to show how much the game of basketball and the game of rap means to you. Let everybody know what it means to be hip to the games by clicking the link in the episode's description to cop some merch and represent the H2DG lifestyle. All right, welcome back to Hip to the Games, where we're going to pick it right off with verse 2, where in the recent days, if you've scrolled on TikTok or Twitter even, you may have seen a video with the caption, "We done with the 90s," to coincide with some of the worst highlights of the era in the effort to dub the current era as the better product. Now, from my view, these videos seem to be directed towards those who might be 20 and under, maybe. I'll be safe and say 18 and under for sure. And I get it. These younger kids are gonna defend their era like I defend mine, and like the generation before me defends theirs, and so on. Nothing wrong with that. But my issue is with the fact that it's become cool to be disrespectful. I don't know what's in the water or the frosted flakes nowadays, but like I don't know why it's so cool to be disrespectful nowadays, especially to elders. I don't know what's up with that. It's funny. I even immediately think of like that game. Trash talk is trash talk, right? But when you hear Anthony Edwards like dissing Kawhi Leonard at the free throw line as if Kawhi isn't a two-time NBA champion, Anthony Edwards, great young player, really that guy that can take the torch moving forward. But like, dude, like you haven't done anything yet. You've been booted out the playoffs. You've barely made it out, if at all, out the first round. And here you are talking to Kawhi Leonard like you've done something, disrespect. Like again, like I said, I get it. It's trash talk, right? That happens. But I think that's kind of the underlying theme with these "we done with the 90s, we done with the 80s" videos. Think about it. A lot of the discourse on social media seems to be getting more disrespectful than ever before. And mind you, I remember being a kid going on YouTube and all you could see in the comments was LeBron traveled, LeBron traveled. Kobrick Bryant. Oh, yeah, give it to Kobe at the end of the game because he's sure. Oh, the most clutch guy in the league is gonna miss it. D Wade is made of glass. Don't do it. Be careful with D Wade because he's gonna get injured anyway. They kind of treated D Wade like they treat AD nowadays. All over the YouTube comments. And to me, that was really the worst of it, though. Like most people were actually having debates in the comments, and it wasn't full of disrespect, it wasn't full of analytics. Like, but see now, for example, you see even a guy like Brian Windhorst, who's done his job for years now, says Jason Tatum is out of the MVP conversation because of 3 days, best record in the league, the star of that team, and yet 3 days suddenly eliminates him from the MVP conversation. Like disrespect is cool now because disrespect makes headlines. Or, even the case of how people say Michael Jordan would be DeMar DeRozan in this era. Huh? I get what they mean in terms of Jordan favoring the mid-range over the three-point shot, but what? You mean to tell me the same Michael Jordan who literally became the blueprint for scoring wings, the moves you see your favorite players do, They either got him from Michael Jordan, maybe Hakeem Olajuwon. But again, right? If you study a guy like Carmelo Anthony, he got it from somebody. He got it from Bernard King. He got it from Michael Jordan. Kobe Bryant, he got it from Michael Jordan. LeBron James, he got it from Kobe. He got it from Michael Jordan. Like, make it make sense. So yes, this whole done with the decade trend carries the same disrespect in my opinion. And my thing is, how can you say we done with the 80s or we done with the 90s? Yet that's who we learned from. That's the beauty of evolution. We go from George Gervin to Michael Jordan to Rod Strickland to Kyrie Irving, right? If we talking finishing, right? we go from Dr. J to Michael Jordan to Vince Carter to Zach LaVine. We go from Larry Bird to Reggie Miller to Ray Allen to Steph Curry. We go from Kareem to Hakeem to Shaq to Duncan to Joel Embiid. That kind of sound like a bar. That was y'all see that flow pattern? Um, if Kareem or Shaq was doing the stuff we seen Embiid do now, they would have went crazy back in the day. The game has to evolve. How are people confused at the way that players were not as athletic in 1990 as they are in 2024? And see, the thing about this trend is that people are picking apart the air balls and the turnovers when we can do the same thing with today's game. Like, if you're going to do that for the 90s, then show some of these missed layups and airball step back threes with 17 seconds left on a shot clock, or these failed post entry passes we see nowadays. Every era has its head scratching plays. Yeah, this era has certainly benefited from YouTube and whatnot, but again, that stuff goes back to the previous eras. The greats learn from those that came before. Something Michael Jackson always used to say was study the greats and become greater. And when I hear that, I think of MJ. I think of Kobe. I think of LeBron. I think of Steph Curry. I think of Kevin Durant. Guys who built off what we saw from the generation before. Kevin Durant is literally Larry Birdish with George Gervin tendencies. LeBron is Scottie Pippen Magic with a little MJ and Karl Malone's body. Like, these dudes went above and beyond. Look what happens when you aren't done with the 90s. And let's be real. A lot of these dudes in the league today, they need the 90s. We done with the 90s. Some of y'all favorite players need the 90s, need the fundamentals of the 80s, right? How many big men in the league today fail to do a drop step or spin move in the post? If I'm on my Stephen A, how many big men in the league can't put a post move to memory when they get a mismatch in the post? How many guards decide, because it ain't just big men, how many guards decide to shoot a three and ignore the big getting deep position in the paint? Why do these guards shoot 3 of 12 from the field and still take contested threes? Oh, I'm a shooter. It's going to fall eventually. Brother, you are 4 of 14. No layups, no fouls drawn, no off ball cuts to the basket. Like, right? It's like chasing the highlight. And it seems to me that some of these players could use the 90s, but that's just me though. That's just me though. And in all seriousness, I know I'm gonna crack my jokes and stuff like that. I'm gonna talk my junk, but I get it. It's just a silly trend on the internet. That's what youngins do. Crack jokes on the old heads in the effort to claim their era is better. But at the same time, the disrespect I think is at an all-time high. They weren't shooting as much back in the day. Perimeter players were not encouraged to shoot as many threes back then as they do now. In fact, we know the game was played inside out back then, as opposed to pick and rolls, pick and pops every trip down. There was strategy. Yeah, it was slow, but there was strategy. There was originality. There was differentiation, and variety between teams. Like I always say, even if not even going back to the 90s, but even if you go like 2010s, like I always say, the Lob City Clippers were way different than the Memphis grit and grind Memphis Grizzlies. And the grit and grind Memphis Grizzlies were different than when you saw Kobe and the Lakers. And then, they were different when you saw Steve Nash and the Suns. Like, different when you saw the San Antonio Spurs. And then when the Warriors blew up, right? They kind of took what the Spurs did, but like went to a different kind of level, especially with the 3-point shot. Like, everybody played different. There was strategy. It was dope, you know? And, I guess I just say all this to say, man, like, thank God that the kids that's saying we done with the 90s ain't in the league. Because if it weren't for current players still picking up those trends of past players, this game wouldn't grow the way that it has. And what's even funnier what's even funnier, two of the best players in the league are the most 80-ish, 90-ish looking players that we've seen in a minute. Luka Doncic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander have some of the most 80s, 90s style of play, yet we done with the 90s. Make it make sense. But that's why there are platforms like this one, where we make sure pieces of the 80s and the 90s are still alive. If I had to relay a message to the youngins, it would be what Mike said, right? Study the greats and become greater. Like, you'd be surprised at what you learn from the older generation. Jordan influenced a whole generation of shooting guards and small forwards. Bill Russell influenced, and I think even still might influence, a whole generation of big men in the way he rebounded the ball, protected the rim, really took pride in being that last line of defense. When you watch Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan talk about that, man, like they got it. They got it. And that's why they were also just as great as Bill. Like Kareem did the same thing with his influence. Hakeem did the same thing with his influence. LeBron has influenced a lot of the forwards and even point guards nowadays, right? Like, this game ain't nothing without the influence of legends. All right. Pick up a book, get on the right side of YouTube and study. There is something to be learned in it all, right? That's why we can't be done with the 80s and we can't be done with the 90s, because there's something to be learned from it in all of it. And it's the same way with hip hop, right? If we make the hip hop comparison, everybody loves to make fun of the way guys like Curtis Blow and Slick Rick rapped, right? I'm gonna take my basketball and do my thing. That's what I do, because I'm Curtis Blow and I'm rapping basketball. You know what I'm saying? Everybody makes fun of that. Don't get me started with Slick Rick. Everybody makes fun of that stuff. But at the same time, Curtis Blow is the reason artists can be signed to labels, major labels, right? Slick Rick is the reason your favorite artist can tell descriptive stories. I guarantee you that. There is no Biggie without Slick Rick. There is no Nas without Slick Rick. I don't care who you throw out there. Slick Rick did his thing and made it cool to do that. And I think Slick Rick might also be the reason why your favorite artist embraces their unique voice, right? Like I always say, man, if you throw out grandma's recipe, your cake is not going to taste like hers. But if you keep it and still find a way to make it your own, that's when evolution happens. So don't be so quick to drop the recipe, right? Don't be so quick to be done with the old, because oftentimes the old still works, even if it could use a few tweaks. So, we ain't done with the 80s. We ain't done with the 90s on this side. That's all I'm going to say. All right, 2 verses down, 1 more to go, and I'm still rolling with hoops as I want to discuss the ways 3 Western Conference contenders all have a shot at the Western Conference Finals. But before we get into that, here's a friendly reminder as the NBA playoffs are near. The 2023-24 NBA season is here, and there's no better time to cop the flyest and authentic merch to rep your squad. If you're looking for the ultimate destination for NBA gear to rep the home team, look no further than the NBA Store. With an extensive selection of authentic and high-quality products like jerseys, hats, and accessories, the NBA Store has everything you need to express yourself. Word to NWA. And with an online presence, it becomes even easier to shop from anywhere in the world. Don't miss out on the latest trends and experiences. Visit the NBA Store today by clicking the affiliate link in this episode's description. Hip to the Games is working in affiliation with the NBA Store and will be compensated for your patronage by utilizing the link provided. I sincerely thank you for all your support. All right, welcome back to this episode of Hip to the Games, and it's about that time. Verse 3, the best, the hardest for last. And, of course, we got to end with a bang. And since it's verse 3, I figured I'd discuss 3 teams out west who, in my eyes, all have a legit shot at the conference finals. The OKC Thunder, the Denver Nuggets, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. They're all sitting top 3 in the West right now. And every time I've been able to catch games from these 3 teams, I get scared for the other teams in the West because they just seem to check more boxes than the other teams. All right, I know the Clippers had a really hot middle of the season run. So if they can get healthy, right, like they might be in this conversation too. But I kept it to these 3 because they've been the most consistent all year round. So what I'm going to do is point out one reason why I feel so confident in each team, while also pointing out one thing that kind of scares me moving forward in pursuit of their championship hopes. So I want to start with the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think the Timberwolves can make the conference finals simply because they have the best defense in the league. Their rotations are on point. They have size, they have versatility, switchability. They are dangerous. They are a really dangerous team. Most teams that have really good defenses can make it that far in the playoffs. I've seen that again. I've seen that I think with the 2011 Chicago Bulls. I've seen that with the 2008 Boston Celtics. I mean, obviously they had the big three, but like they were a great defensive team. Most defensive teams can get you that far. But of course, the offense has to pick up their end of the bargain as well. I think the teams that don't usually have difficulties offensively and are really good defensive teams make it that far in the playoffs. But as I stated earlier this season, I think with Ant Edwards leading the charge, that's great, but they even have guys like Nas Reed and even I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker off the bench. Like those are some really good pieces, and they come in and make some shots for that team off the bench. Like when Minnesota needs a spark, those guys come in. When they want to just keep the foot on the neck, those guys come in and do their thing. Like they've shown that they don't expect one guy to get it done offensively. They are a real solid hungry basketball team, and they just seem to have that energy this year where they could make a deep run. Again, I watched them in games, even the most recent Clippers game on TNT. Like, yeah, obviously Kawhi Leonard going down is going to give you some confidence if you're the other team, but like the way they were down, what it was like 22 points, but like they just stayed locked in and they started hitting shots and just D'ing up, and it was just, I mean, the Clippers just that was a bad loss for them because, and I think it was one of those wins where the Timberwolves they took it from them. You know what I'm saying? Like obviously the Clippers, you can imagine they were a little disheartened to see Kawhi leave the game, but man, the Minnesota, they just like woke up and went crazy on them. And, I think they really have brought that same energy to every game they play. Even there are games they have slow starts, but then they get right back into it and they finish the job. I think that's a true testament of a contender when you don't just give up those games, you actually overcome that and you can even get a W in the win column. And, it's again, that's what separates the good teams from the great teams, right? Or I should say the great teams from the good teams. And Minnesota's definitely up there. Now, obviously, the injury to Karl Anthony Towns brings a challenge, as if he's still out come playoff time, that's one extra all-star player they'll miss dearly. That said, they still been able to show poise without him, and I think they can still make noise out west. That said, I am curious to see if they struggle with complacency. Will they be satisfied making it out the first round? Especially if they do indeed face the Suns in the first round. Are they going to be happy they beat a team with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker leading the way, or stay hungry and finish strong? That's all I really worry about for them. And even with that matchup in mind, like obviously, the Suns, they're not the best team, but like you still have Kevin Durant and Devin Booker to worry about. Like the Timberwolves have the defenders for it, but it's also like you can't take a series like that lightly. I don't care how much depth the Suns lack. Like you can't take that team lightly. And so I wonder where their mindset's going to be at in terms of complacency. That's all I really worry about because they have all the tools to succeed, but this team also has a lot of guys who haven't really had deep playoff runs, so I question if they are mentally ready for that journey to come. That said, they've had an awesome season, and it's a team that I definitely wouldn't want to see in a 7-game series. But now let's talk about the OKC Thunder. Because no lie, all year I just got the feeling that they would be a lock for the Western Conference Finals. It's crazy to think about because there are so many parallels to the 2012 Thunder in the sense that they've really started to establish that big three between KD, Russ, and Harden. And, now Sam Presti, he gets another chance with SGA, Chet, and Jalen Williams. They play off each other so well, especially Jalen Williams, man. That dude reminds me so much of what James Harden used to bring to OKC. Having an extra fearless dude out there who can make big plays down the stretch of games. He doesn't take himself out of games. Like he's been such a great piece for them. But even down to the fact that you blinked and OKC was in the finals. I think it's really just the same thing this year. They came from being a lottery team to a play-in team, and now here they are, number one in the West, right? Even better than the Nuggets. Like, I think it's a credit to Sam Presti, obviously, right? But Coach Daigneault, has made it work. He's been excellent, And this team really carries like that college environment. They play selfless. They play for each other. They are genuinely happy for one another when somebody has a hot night. Like they don't care how they win, and they're young and they kind of follow that stoic personality of Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. Like it's no surprise that everything has been able to click for them. Because man, they got some versatile guys over there, and the teams that have sneaky weapons like that are always tough to beat because those guys are darn near impossible to scout. What do you do when Isaiah Joe goes off for 3 pointers, right? What do you do when Kaysen Wallace comes in and he's knocking down threes, right? Um, I mean, they just have a lot of guys on that team, and teamwork has made the dream work for this team, and that's why they can have a nice route to the conference finals, right? And as a number one seed, that's kind of what you expect, right? If we the best team all year in our conference, we should be playing, you know, in May and even June. But that said, as with all younger teams, you have to wonder if they'll be able to handle the pressure and physicality of the playoffs, because the thing about young teams like this, when they play more experienced teams, those experienced teams are going to try to big boy them and often succeed in doing so, right? Because there's going to be some games, you know, um, even a guy like Shea Gilgis, right? He may not get that whistle that he got in the regular season. Jalen Williams might, he might miss some of them shots that he was hitting in the regular season. Chet Holmgren, big key right there, because as a thinner big man, like teams are gonna go right at his chest every trip down. Like they are gonna try to wear him down and make that paint, force them to make an adjustment to where they have to play small ball and it can open up for easier looks in the paint and they won't have to worry about Chet Holmgren's rim protection. Like that's what I'm going to be looking for with this team. And I think the league is different now. Yes, the playoffs are still intense and fun and everything we know them to be. Yet at the same time, I do think the game doesn't slow down as much as it used to. I think we still have seen blowouts over the years. We've still let's be real, there has been some regular season esque playoff games in recent years, and I wonder how that will be for this team. Obviously, I think SGA is going to be fine. I think he'll thrive in this setting, though I think it is important to note that the last time he was in the playoffs was in the bubble, and he wasn't really the go-to guy that he is now. So you just wonder, can this team channel some of the maturity that they've shown in the regular season? Can they channel that to the playoffs? And again, much like the 2012 Thunder, that was also a young team that had to get past defending champion Dallas Mavericks, get revenge on Kobe and the Lakers, right? Overcome the veteran San Antonio Spurs in 6 games to make the NBA Finals. Like this team may have to do a very similar thing, right? They're going to have to beat those top dogs and probably the older guys in the West if they really want to make it far this year. They have a chance at facing Kyrie and Luka in the first round. A guy in Kyrie who's won a championship before and a guy in Luka who has led his team to the conference finals before. So it will be interesting to see if these young guns in OKC can stand firm when it matters the most and establish themselves as a true top dog in the league for years to come. And then lastly, there's the defending champs, the Denver Nuggets, right? No secret here. You know what you're gonna get with this team. Jokic is gonna run the show, and whether they score 100 points or 120 points, they have a chance at winning. The ball movement is dangerous. The cutting is dangerous. The strength in numbers has been pretty dangerous all year. I think, which is a little bit surprising, because especially come playoff time, like last year, they were pretty much running an 8-man rotation. While this year it's been more 9-man, 10-man rotation. But they got a formula that works, and win or loss, they stick to it. They remind me a lot of the San Antonio Spurs and even Dallas Mavericks back in the day. Like it may not always result in a chip, but you knew what you were getting into. Like their formula was not changing, and it works. And I think everybody knows it. This is just a really good, sound, fundamental basketball team. They just operate better than everybody in the league, pretty much. Like they are a smart team. Jokic is going to do his thing, but he's not going to force things. This is usually the time of year where Jamal Murray starts to heat up, right? The playoffs is kind of his area to step up and look like an all-star caliber player. Michael Porter Jr. has had a similar scoring season this year, but he's rebounding the ball he's rebounding the ball better, excuse me. So that certainly helps. Aaron Gordon continues to be that glue guy for this team. So they can definitely make the conference finals off the formula they've established over the years, and obviously the formula that worked last year as they got the championship. And I think for many people this year, even as a second seed, they've been seen as the favorite to come out the West because night in and night out, they just find a way to outsmart the other teams. Whether it's an off night or not, like they just find ways to win, and that's always scary to go up against. A team that's that mentally tough, a team that just sticks to their formula and makes the most of it, like always scary to go up against. However, it may just be me. I might be tripping, but I just feel like there have been moments this year where I just feel like the Denver Nuggets are beatable. I noticed they lack some size. They lack some size off the bench. Something I'm a little bit surprised of, because DeAndre Jordan had some vintage moments this year. So I wonder like if he's going to get time at all. Probably not. So I kind of think about that. But again, the small ball just continues to work for them, right? So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But for example, like I think of this, if they get the Kings in the first round like they're supposed to, we saw how despite winning the series last year, the Warriors often struggled with the amount of size the Kings had. And I can't help but see the Nuggets struggle with the same thing. Especially as the Kings have such a similar makeup to the Nuggets, right? The way they go through Sabonis and Fox, and the Nuggets go through Jokic and Murray, that would be an awesome series right there. And I'd have faith that the Kings could put in some work right there because, they have a similar makeup. And, I think granted the Nuggets could finish very well and even with a better record than last year. So maybe they aren't beatable after all. But, funny enough, the thing that supports me saying that in the first place is this. This year they are 1-3 versus both Sacramento and OKC. So again, like I said, if they do indeed get that first round matchup versus Sacramento, that's a team that they lost the season series to. And then again, at some point, if you won a championship, you're probably going to have to run into OKC this year. So if you're this is a team they're also 1-3 against. And then as at the time of this recording, they're 0-1 versus Minnesota, right? Two of these teams I just talked about. So is Denver beatable this year? They might be. They might kill everybody else, but when it comes to these contenders, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. That's something to think about. As a Bulls fan, I certainly try to watch that because I've been on the other side of that where I was so confident in the regular season series, but then when playoff time came, we got destroyed. Right. So again, the Denver Nuggets probably not tripping about that, but I think that's something to think about if you are a Denver Nugget fan because they haven't really gotten it done versus those teams. Like I said, Sacramento's very similar to them. They're 1-3. OKC contender 1-3. Minnesota contender 0-1. So definitely there might it might not be an easy road for Denver, right? They always say the second championship is always the hardest. It's even harder than the first one, right? So that's certainly something the Denver Nuggets are going to have to think about moving forward. And I think they're going to have to fire on all cylinders if they want to repeat this year. And with a slightly different team too, they lost Bruce Brown, they lost Jeff Green, like the journey definitely won't be the same. So it will be interesting to see if they are triumphant again or a brave soul out west finds a way to knock them off the top. All right, so some interesting verses for today's episode, but you already know we ain't done yet, as we do have one more segment. Without further ado, it's time to reveal this week's Hip to the Games Dog of the Week. If you've been here long enough, you know that we all about being doggish on H2DG, where I like to highlight those that are relentless towards their goals and exude a confidence that supersedes any self-doubt or doubt from haters. So I decided to consistently take a moment to acknowledge an NBA or even WNBA player who is hooping and showing what it means to be doggish. And last time out, that guy was Demonis Sabonis. But this time, I won't lie, I had a little bit of trouble. I don't like to duplicate selections, and there are some weeks where I didn't always want it to be the obvious choice, and right, and then obviously with a bi-weekly schedule, there might be a time where somebody's might be really hot, but then as I want to give them dog of the week, they they kind of start trailing back a little bit. So at first I was having a little trouble, but at the same time, a lot of these guys are just too dominant not to be picked. And that's exactly why I had to go with Luka Doncic for the latest dog of the week. I mean, Luka's coming off a recent stretch of 7 straight triple doubles, dropping 30 points in 6 of them. Despite suffering a recent hamstring injury, he's got the Mavs rolling right now, especially since the trade deadline, and continues to be a master with that rock, man. That's all I see when I see Luka. He's a master with that pill. I mean, he plays at his own pace. His ability to switch up his rhythm keeps defenders on their toes and really helps him be the scorer that he is. And with a career best and league leading 34 points per game, he's made improvements in that area also. He's just under 50% from the field. He's kind of flirting with a career high there, shooting a career high 37% from deep and 79% from the free throw line. So, he's around his usual 30 points, 32 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists averages. But for him to turn that up to like 34 points, 9 rebounds, and almost 10 assists, like he's just a goon. He's incredible to watch, and he's made the Mavs look like one of the best teams, even as an eighth seed, right? And this is the old school eighth seed, right, in the Western Conference. This is an eighth seed, and they're 38-29, like at the time of this recording. So it's really impressive to see how Luka is able to put up these kinds of numbers consistently in his young career too, right? He's had his little injuries and stuff here and there, but for the most part, he's just been incredibly consistent with what he does, man. And he carries such a huge load with this team, and even with a guy like Kyrie Irving on his side, he's putting up these numbers. So I think this has probably served as his best MVP campaign to date, especially when you consider his numbers have actually gotten better. But he continues to get his teammates in positions to score. He shoots the lights out himself. His patience combined with the use of his post game and his crafty handles, it all makes him one of the most unique players we've seen, to the point where his dominance just almost doesn't make sense, right? Like he just continues to be incredible, darn near legendary, even at just 25 years old. And because of that, he's the latest well-earned H2DG Dog of the Week. And with that, we've made it to the end of another H2DG episode. From Nelly's opinion on the 2000s being the toughest era ever in rap/hip hop, to my reminder that we ain't done with the 90s. Some thoughts on the T-Wolves, Thunder, and Nuggets conference finals chances, and showing love to the superb play of Luka Doncic. Plenty of fun topics within hip hop and basketball. But as always, at the end of the day, these were just my thoughts. So I want to hear from you. You can tweet the show at Hip to the Games, or tag me directly on IG or Twitter at Desmond Powell _ and share your thoughts on any of the topics discussed today, as I would love to hear or read your thoughts. And as always, I want to thank you for listening to another episode of H2DG, all for the love of the best combo there is. And of course, here's a huge shout out to you for being hip to the games. Peace out and God bless. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Hip to the Games, and if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit up the socials at Desmond Powell _ and at Hip to the Games on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, so you don't miss out on the fun. And please follow or subscribe to the show and leave a review on the podcast platform you're on right now, as your support is greatly appreciated.